Well, it's finally here, my top 10 favourite games of all time list. Now, these picks should be pretty obvious to you all. I mean, I'm mainly doing this for two reasons. One, because I was tagged by Alex from TurboZone, and two, I also wanted a video for people new to the channel so that they can watch and see what games I'm into, because I think this is a good, channel trailer for the whole thing. But yeah, this is going to be my top 10 list, and I hope you all enjoy it. I'm only going to be talking about one game per series, and I will start with an honourable mention, which is Urban Reign, the game I just reviewed. Yeah, that game nearly got on this list. It almost got on this list, but it didn't quite make it. So yeah, that game's amazing. So yeah, I hope you enjoy my top 10 list, and yeah, without further ado, let's begin. Number 10, Devil May Cry 3 Special Edition. If you asked me what the definitive game of the 2000s was, my answer would be Devil May Cry 3. While I'm not too big on the earlier games in the series, Devil May Cry 3 won me over as its combat system is absolutely nuts. Not only is it flexible and technical, but it has these small little touches that make it stand out from other games in the genre, like the ability to surf on top of your enemies and spin on poles to hit enemies around you. Even the game's narrative feels like it was built around the nature of the gameplay, telling its story mostly through choreography instead. The music also ties into the gameplay, as its lyrics are constantly berating you, which further motivates you to eliminate everything in your path in the most stylish way possible. It's a fantastic game in so many ways and is the best 3D beat-em up ever made. Number 9. Pokemon Gold, Silver and Crystal. If you grew up in the 2000s, then chances are you had one of these games. The Pokemon series is a huge part of my childhood, and is the series that got me into gaming, so it's very important to me. Over time, however, I lost interest in the newer installments, but I still have a fondness for the earlier titles. While Pokemon Yellow may have been the first game I ever played, its sequel was a colossal improvement. There were so many quality of life improvements implemented that many Pokemon fans take for granted nowadays, like the ability to use HM moves by simply pressing A near the thing you want to use it on, instead of having to go into the menu to select the HM move you want to use. On top of that, they added a real-time clock in the game, which would change the day and night cycle based on the time of day you were playing, which at the time made the game feel like an extension of real life. Since every day of the week has its own unique events, and certain Pokemon could only be caught during certain times of the day, this hooked me as a kid, as each day brought about something new to do. It's crazy how these little changes were such a huge deal back then. Ultimately though, it's just more of the same, just better in every single way. The original formula peaked with this game, and the fact that they added the entirety of the first game's region kinda made the original game feel obsolete in a way. This was the ultimate Pokemon game, and still is to this day. Number 8. Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards. Despite the fact that I never grew up with the Nintendo 64, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Kirby 64 as it made me feel like a kid again. All the levels look like the sort of thing you'd expect from a children's picture book. There's even cutscenes between levels which illustrate the game's story without a single line of dialogue, and it's presented in a very simplified way. It's sometimes refreshing to go back to the game for that reason. To top it off, you have what is arguably the best soundtrack in the series, and it's the only game in the series to this day that allows you to combine two different copy abilities in order to make a completely new one. Now the game gets panned by some people for being too slow paced, and as much as I enjoy the fast paced Sakurai games, I don't see slow pacing as being a bad thing for this game. In a way, it kind of fits the nature of the game, as the artistic appeal that the game brings to the table makes me want to take my time as I navigate through all the levels. Plus the game is also a tad more challenging than the average Kirby game, since you don't have infinite jumps in this one, meaning you have to time your jumps more carefully, but at the same time I never found the game to be overly difficult either. Hands down, the best Nintendo 64 game ever made, and my favourite platformer of all time. Number 7. Odin Sphere Leifthrasir. Odin Sphere Leifthrasir is hands down the best game released in the 2010s, which kinda says a lot about how terrible the 2010s were, since this is technically a remake of a 2007 game on the PS2 titled Odin Sphere, a game that was brimming with so much potential but was bogged down by numerous flaws that didn't allow it to fully reach that potential. Thankfully, its remake, Leifthrasir, not only managed to fix every single issue that the original game had, but it did so by replacing the entire combat and alchemy system. The new combat system has way more flexibility. Combos are both easy and satisfying to perform, as they can be pulled off by simply moving the analog stick in the middle of an attack string to perform whichever move you wish. The horrendous power gauge in the original no longer stuns you when you attack too much, instead acting as a special attack gauge that you can utilise at any time by either selecting moves from the menu or setting up a shortcut by using the circle button. Alchemy is considerably more simplified than it was in the original, plus it's no longer a tedious ordeal to grow food either. Now, I could talk about the differences all day long, but the reason why I love this game as a whole comes down to more than just the refined combat system. Everything that was great about the original game is still here. The music is fantastic, the visuals are gorgeous, and the story is also pretty good too. I really like how they tried to tell the story from multiple perspectives, as it helps flesh out the game's world better than if it was only told from one perspective. Odin's Leifthrasir has to be the most improved game ever made, hands down. Number 6. Mount & Blade Warband. Out of all the games to make it on this list, Mount & Blade Warband is probably the most unique, as it is a sandbox strategy action game with a heavy emphasis on growth. I personally consider this game to be the most immersive video game ever created, as it gives me the agency to make meaningful choices in how I choose to play. There is no set path to this game, you just get dumped into the world and find your own adventure. This brings about what I consider to be a true role-playing experience, one that feels very similar to that of Dungeons & Dragons, in the sense that I create my own character, define them however I want to, and essentially live out their life in this medieval world the way I choose to. The only downside to all this is that the game can get pretty addicting, to the point that I can never keep track of time when I play it. Mount & Blade Warband is what Skyrim should have been. Instead of being open world, give the player total freedom in how they choose to progress through the game, because player agency is what the Western RPG genre specialises in. For this reason, Mount & Blade Warband is the greatest Western RPG ever created, and one of my favourite games of all time. Number 5, Warcraft III, Reign of Chaos, and Frozen Throne. You could say that I have a love-hate relationship with this game, as I complain about it all the time, but the reason for this is that I became so invested in the game's story and world that all the hate I have for this game is fueled by my passion for it. Much like in Odin Sphere, the story is told from multiple perspectives, and as a result, there are a lot of morally grey characters in this game. This helps to make them feel more believable than the typical benevolent hero you see in most games. Each race has its own culture and reasoning for fighting, but among each of them, the individuals themselves have their own agenda, and this not only causes a clash of races, but it also creates conflict from within each race. There's so much lore to this series that the game doesn't go into, and to experience the story in its entirety, the game expects you to not only play the previous 2 games, but to also read a couple of novels which bridge the gap after the events of Warcraft II. Despite this, however, the game can still be played without any prior experience, though some of the characters may seem a little underdeveloped, mainly because all of that takes place in the novels. What makes the story work well is that it doesn't waste too much time explaining things and gets straight to business. There are a lot of interesting character dynamics to keep things interesting throughout, which drives the story well enough to the point that you don't need to fully understand what is going on to appreciate it. Now, you're probably noticing that I haven't brought up the gameplay, and that's because as a game, Warcraft 3 isn't exactly brilliant. I mean, the campaign is handled in a unique way, as it adds leveling and items on top of the real-time micromanagement. But that doesn't change the fact that the entire game is just micromanaging as fast as you can, and for that reason, I can't say that I'm a fan of the gameplay, but it's tolerable enough to put up with to experience the story that the game has to offer. The music fits the mood of each section of the game, particularly in the cinematics, which are absolutely awe-inspiring. If Blizzard knew how to do anything, it's make cutscenes, because Warcraft 3 has the greatest cinematic cutscenes I have ever seen in a video game. Overall, it's a game I love mainly for the story and not much else, but I love the story so much that it manages to make it onto my top 5. Number 4, Painkiller. Yeah, I know, you all saw this coming, but Painkiller is the one and only game that got me to truly appreciate the first-person shooter genre. Now, a lot of people see this game as just being a dumb, old-school style throwback game, but to me, this is the true evolution of the first-person shooter genre, because it managed to get mostly everything right. While most FPS games of the time chose to take the Half-Life approach in the sense of having complex level structures and more emphasis on narrative, Painkiller went in the opposite direction, trimming out all of the needless drivel you see in so many first-person shooters nowadays, choosing to focus on the actual shooting instead of all the silly little gimmicky nonsense that was thrown in a lot of FPS games at the time. There's no reloading, no puzzles, save for a few shitty bosses, no ADS, no keycards, plenty of ammo, no maze-like level structure, and most importantly, bunny hopping. The gunplay is without a doubt the most satisfying gunplay I have ever experienced in a first-person shooter, and this is mainly due to the fact that the guns are so damn powerful that most enemies will die in a single hit, and will often die in the goriest way possible. The havoc physics make this all the more satisfying, as you can launch the pathetic corpses of your enemies for miles with a well-placed shot. The game also has the most exotic arsenal of weaponry I have ever seen in a first-person shooter. The Painkiller itself is particularly unique as it doubles as both a melee and a projectile weapon that has infinite ammo. How this works is that there are multiple firing functions for every single weapon, which helps to alleviate weapon swapping. There are only 5 weapons in the base game, which means that the hotkeys can easily be navigated without having to stray too far from the movement keys. It's a fantastic design idea that befits the fast-paced nature of the game so damn well. You can press the left mouse button to use the Painkiller as a buzzsaw, but if you press the right mouse button, it launches the spinning blade as a projectile which can hit multiple enemies at once if it connects with them. You can also press the right mouse button on its own to launch the blade without spinning, and by doing so you can not only kill enemies from afar, but you also create a laser which both damages and stuns approaching foes. There's so much you can do with this weapon alone, but once you have a full arsenal of weapons, you feel like an unstoppable force. It's so fun to mess around with all of the weapons, as the physics and the gore work hand in hand to make each shot fired feel so rewarding. It can be pretty funny to stake enemies into walls and watch their corpses just hang there for a few minutes. If you have a good PC, there's a cheat which lets you keep all the corpses from disappearing, allowing you to preserve all the carnage you have caused throughout the entire level. The gameplay loop may be simple, but the level of kinetic empowerment in this game is unmatched due to all of these small details. The thing is though, my love for Painkiller doesn't just stop there. Even though the levels consist of a linear sequence of arenas to fight in, they are without a doubt the most aesthetically pleasing levels I have ever seen in a first-person shooter. The atmosphere in each level is unmatched, and there's tons of variety in terms of level concepts. One minute you'll be in a haunted cemetery, only to later find yourself shooting demonic inmates in a prison complex. Each level includes its own set of enemies too, so there's always something new to see, and this does a great job at keeping things fresh. To top it all off, Painkiller is hands down the most metal video game ever created. Not only is it a game named after a Judas Priest metal album that features many gothic locations and demonic enemies, but it is also accompanied with a fantastic metal soundtrack of its own, which does a fantastic job at getting players in the mood for some violent action. With its hauntingly gorgeous atmosphere, gore-filled gunplay, and adrenaline-pumping metal soundtrack, Painkiller is without a doubt the greatest first-person shooting experience you will ever have in your life. Number 3. Grandia II. Usually, JRPG protagonists are either obnoxious Boy Scouts, annoying whiny bitches, or are insufferably emo. Because of this, I've gotten used to disliking JRPG protagonists, usually preferring the side characters instead, either that or the villain, because the lead hero is absolutely dreadful. Ryudo, on the other hand, is a snarky, cynical, rebellious loudmouth who dedicates his entire life to talking shit, kicking ass, and getting paid. Therefore, he is without a doubt the most relatable JRPG protagonist I have ever encountered in my life. Ryudo's existence alone makes Grandia II one of my favourite games of all time, as just about every single line of dialogue that comes out of his mouth is absolutely fantastic. Every so often there will be a conversation in game, either in the story or with random NPCs, where Ryudo says the most ludicrously delivered lines of savagery you will ever see in your life, and this can happen literally at any moment, even during serious scenes which completely takes you off guard. The amount of creativity in this game's dialogue is simply put phenomenal, and it's not just Ryudo, every character talks in a ridiculous manner, and it brings about a comical tone throughout. Despite this though, Grandia 2's story handles some serious themes, and while it may appear to be simplistic and cliché at times, it kind of plays to the game's strengths, since it presents them in a tongue-in-cheek manner, one that is elevated by the game's hilariously written dialogue. You can't not love this game's story because it's so fiercely self-aware about how cheesy and generic it is that it becomes an absolute joy to experience. It also makes the serious moments all the more impactful because you actually care about these characters, since the comic relief only serves to make them all the more lovable. Plus, it is a harsh contrast to the overall nature of the game, to the point that when shit does get real, it hits you like a truck. It's such a well-crafted story that you won't want it to end, and without Ryudo, it could never have worked. The other characters are likeable as well, don't get me wrong, but Ryudo is the centerpiece that holds it all together, because he is so different from other JRPG protagonists, you kinda need to see it to believe it. The soundtrack is absolutely fantastic, featuring plenty of 80s style rock and some great piano music too. The music is composed extremely well and is really catchy, fitting the mood of the game perfectly. With all of this in mind, Grandia II is a wonderful game, and I haven't even gotten around to talking about the game's combat, which I'm not even going to talk about, since I have a review. Go read that review if you want to know more about the combat. All you need to know is that it is good enough to get my number 3 spot on the list. Number 2, F-Zero GX. Objectively speaking, F-Zero GX should have my number 1 spot, as it is the closest thing to a perfect game that we will ever get. It is by far the most adrenaline-pumping video game ever created, as it has a fantastic sense of speed, and the vehicles handle very loosely by default, making it difficult to control them at high speeds. But that's part of the game's appeal, as it's all about building and maintaining high speed while keeping your machine stable. This is where the trigger buttons come into play, as they allow you for more precision in terms of how your machine handles. Pressing either L or R allows you to slide your machine, which often allows for more precision at the cost of speed. Managing stability and speed is the core of what makes this game challenging and fun. Each machine handles differently though, so you may find some machines are a lot less precise with their sliding, but can slide around corners easier, while others are so precise that you can barely turn them with it. For some machines you may wish to perform a drift, which involves pressing both triggers simultaneously, allowing them to take tighter corners than you usually would. The thing is though, that because all the machines handle differently, you may find yourself having to utilise other techniques like quick turns, which are performed by transitioning from a slide to a drift to get certain machines around corners. I really enjoy the diverse handling tools this game offers, and they truly make for some smooth, exciting gameplay. Of course there's more to F-Zero GX than just that. The music is a mix of techno and metal, and does a fantastic job at building up the adrenaline and intensity throughout the game. It fits the fast-paced nature of the game so damn well, and I absolutely adore listening to it. The tracks look gorgeous too. They kinda have to, since if they didn't, you simply wouldn't notice due to how fast-paced the game is, so they need to stand out. The game features a surprising amount of world building for a racing game, as well as a story mode. A lot of it is cheesy nonsense, but that's why I love it. The interviews at the end of a race feel like your typical over-the-top wrestling promo. It's fantastic. Each character has their own theme song too, many of which are awesome. There's also a garage that allows you to customize your own machine, which is absolutely fantastic. What more could you want from this game? It's a phenomenal experience that no other racing game could possibly match. Number 1. Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria. Now it shouldn't come as a shock by now that Valkyrie Profile 2 is my favourite game of all time, as I've already stated it before in my review of the game. Thing is though, that I don't think I managed to properly convey just how much this game means to me. Valkyrie Profile 2's phenomenal soundtrack and gorgeous visuals blend so damn well together that it might as well be a walking simulator. The side-scrolling nature of the game may appear restrictive at first, but this limitation allows the environments to look considerably more detailed than a fully 3D world ever could, and honestly I prefer it this way, especially when you consider the fact that most games nowadays are full of empty open environments. I've always argued that creativity is the ability to reach the boundaries of one's limits, and Valkyrie Profile 2 is the greatest example of such a game, as it truly makes the most of what the PlayStation 2 was capable of in the visual department. It truly is best described as being a work of art in motion. Valkyrie Profile 2 played with my emotions in ways that no other games could. The narrative is great for sure if you can get over the slow start, as it has a fantastic finale, but the game's writing is not what got me so emotionally attached to it. The soundtrack is what truly illustrates the narrative, as it is filled to the brim with emotion. While many of the tracks are atmospheric and calming, bringing the world around you to life, later on the music slowly starts to reflect the state of the narrative, and while this isn't an entirely new concept, it's something that Valkyrie Profile 2 does better than any other game. It's not the gameplay, story or characters, rather the music and visuals that carry you through all the way to the end of this game. This is what I consider to be true exploration, as I am actually exploring a work of art, not just wandering around empty landscapes for hours trying to find out where I need to go. Valkyrie Profile 2 understands what I appreciate in a game the most, and that's ultimately why it is my favourite game of all time. Of course it doesn't just end there, the combat is unlike any other game, and fits the game's elegance with its steady pacing. It plays out in synchronised time, but is actually an action RPG which offers a surprising amount of depth if you are willing to delve deeper into it. Personally, I chose to break the game and become stupidly powerful early on because that's kind of how I enjoy my games, though it can be really satisfying to pull off a well-timed combo. Needless to say, the biggest appeal of the combat is its visual flair, particularly during the soul crushes, which are some of the most flashy attacks I have ever seen in a video game. All of this is accompanied with some really awesome battle quotes from each of the characters. The voice work is fantastic in this game, and the battle quotes bring out the best of the voice actors. Nearly every character in this game is a total badass. You have Dylan, Arngrim and Brahms, who are competing to become the most macho motherfuckers on the planet, Hurst, who's an absolute savage, then you have Lazard, who is a complete enigma throughout the majority of the game, but later on, he becomes the coolest of them all. Even the Einherjar are handled well in this game, despite what many were led to believe by the game's critics. Sure, there aren't any cutscenes that feature them like in the first game, but if you check their biographies in the start screen, there's a ton of interesting lore to be found, and if you put two Einherjar into your party, they may even have a brief conversation at the start of each fight, giving their backstories more meaning. Considering the fact that Einherjar were added to the game at the last minute for balancing reasons, this attention to detail is shocking. There are so many little details in this game that I can't help but adore it. Ultimately, Valkyrie Profile 2 is the biggest reason why I have become so jaded as a gamer, because it set my expectations for games way too high. There's nothing that comes even remotely close to being as impressive as Valkyrie Profile 2 nowadays, and there will never ever be another game like it. It truly is one of a kind. So there you have it, my top 10 favourite games of all time. And now I have to tag some other people to do top 10 favourite games of all time. And I'm going to take great pleasure in tagging Kakino Solar, Joe, Bryant Chambers, and Daniel Santos. Those are my 4 picks. So you're all going to want to make a video of your top 10 favourite games of all time. That's kind of what I am tagging you to do. Now, of course, you can take your time, do it in your own time, or choose not to do it at all, if that's what you want to do. But for everybody else, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.